Has he always worn a scrum cap? He's just looking for a little bit more protection, maybe.
Traditionally, scrum caps weren't developed to give impact protection. A lot of people think that they were, but we were ahead of the curve in that regard.
So Mark, to me that looks like a regular scrum cap, just like every other scrum cap on the market, but it isn't, is it? Tell me why it's different.
Yeah, so I suppose we've three key differentiators from what's on the market at the moment. Number one, and the most obvious one, is the impact protection that we can offer players. So in comparison to what's on the market at the moment, we can reduce those impacts to the head by up to about 75%. Another key differentiator for us is the level of R&D that we've gone into with the product, and then our third key differentiator really is this new World Rugby trial. We're the first company in the world that has met all of the entry criteria for the new World Rugby trial.
How have you made it quite so much more effective?
So what we're using is we use viscoelastic foams that can deal with energy repeatedly. So if you take a standard scrum cap, it has an inner layer of fabric, an outer layer of fabric, and a 10 mil one layer of foam in the middle. We have a multi-layer system that can deal with energy repeatedly. I suppose a simple analogy would be it's like a bulletproof vest. So rather than the force passing straight through, it's dispersed over a wider area.
So Anthony, tell me about this mouthguard. It looks to all intents and purposes very similar to a normal one, but it's far from normal.
Well, it is a normal mouthguard, but completely abnormal. It's got built into it electronics. We've got accelerometers, gyroscopes, magnetometers, FM aerial. So it'll actually measure all the impacts happening to a player's head, whether it's in training or in a match, and then broadcast that over FM to a receiver at the side of a pitch, so people can see exactly what's going on all the time. It's been used widely by the Ospreys. For example, they had a coaching regime and they found that people running into a ruck, let's say at 5 metres, were generating a far higher load on the head than if they ran in from 3 metres. So they actually managed to modify this to a shorter run in. Or other situations where they had a player lying on the ground simulating a ruck situation, and they thought the player on the ground would be in a zero force environment, but in actual fact that player was getting trampled on quite a lot, and they realised that that person was actually taking more trauma than everybody else running into the ruck. So adjustments to training regimes.
So essentially what we're talking about here is a tightening of the net. There should be a few less concussions slipping through the net on account of something like this.
I think we're very careful to say this doesn't interpret, but it adds to the pool of data that coaches, medics and what have you can use, and hopefully it's part of a very, very complicated and large jigsaw, but hopefully will be a very important piece of it.
Okay, so some interesting stuff to talk about there. Ben, I'm going to go to you first. As someone who wore a head guard when he played, I don't think many of you did. Okay,
really good. Well,
actually, Hugo said, judging some of the haircuts you had, you probably should have worn a head guard more.
Fair.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did actually.
I did.
No, Ben, why did you wear a head guard?
Look, when I first started wearing it, it was for the wrong reasons. That you know, I got a couple of bangs on the head. Wasn't knocked out or anything, but just sort of saw the black circles starting to get a bit bigger, and just thought I'll just wear it in training a little bit. Wore it in training and actually felt, well, it actually helps with other things. But I knew very early on that it didn't help necessarily with concussions, because a lot of the concussion injury would be your brain moving within the skull, and obviously that can happen even if you don't have a bang on the head. If you have a big collision or you land funnily and your head, you get whiplash or whatever, you can get it there. But you know, as long as people don't think this is the sole answer and that no one will get concussed now, anything that can help, I certainly think it's a great idea, and thought we might try it with Oz. Oz, if you just put this on, I'll just give your helmet a little bit of a bash and.
Wow, that's a bit tight.
No.
So you'll see, if I hit him there, nothing really happens. But if I hit you there, nothing really happens. So. No, look, I genuinely think it's a serious. It is a serious subject. He's fine. It is a serious subject, concussions, and it's not one thing that's going to solve things. It's like the mouthguard as well. That's not going to solve all. But if we can reduce, you know, the incidences slightly, it's a good thing, because it is one of the biggest threats to our game at the moment. Not necessarily just the long-term health of the players, which is of massive importance, but equally to now we've gone so far the other way in protecting the players, which is absolutely right. It makes it very difficult for coaches because they might lose 2 players to a head injury and suddenly they haven't got a person to play in the right position. And so anything we can do to address probably the most serious issue in our game at the moment, both for player safety and to make the game better, is great.
But it's interesting what Ben said, because you knew early on that it wasn't to, stop you from having concussions. But I think there's a...
I think a lot of parents do.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of mini rugby parents
absolutely,
do. Absolutely, yeah. And that's one. It's a bit like the NFL and the fact they were wearing helmets and thought that they could run into people and make head tackles because they were protected, and that was exactly the opposite. Funnily enough, the NFL have had a competition quite recently for tech companies to go away and design a new helmet, and the winners would get a massive cash prize as well, and then get it made. So it's a big thing in sport, and as we get more information about head injuries and concussions, then it can only be a good thing.
So this head guy's got a 5-year trial with World Rugby. As someone who did suffer, from concussions, and you did have a number of concussions over your career, is this something now that you would trial in your playing day?
Yeah, I suppose I would if there was science behind dispersing any blows and giving you a fighting chance of staying on the pitch. And I think that's ultimately what players want to do. That's why it has to be the decision, whether a player's concussed or not, has to be taken out of their hands, because your gut feeling when you're out there is that you don't want to leave your team. You want to remain there and fight with them, and whether you're thinking clearly or not, that is your gut reaction. And so when concussions do occur, you've got to take that out of players' hands. And if you can have an instrument where it allows a player in a safe environment to continue playing having received a blow, because you've got scientific data, and we're a long way away from that yet, but it has to be a good thing, and it's definitely something that I would look at as a player. I started wearing a scrum cap in the early years because it kind of added a little bit of bravery to sticking your head in places that
That's not always a good thing, though, is it?
No, it's not.
For,
so it's kind of counterintuitive to the whole game.
Yeah.
So it's
we've got so far to how you treat head injuries now won't necessarily be the same as it will be in 10 years, and the systems will get better, and this is all part of it. I was speaking to one of the medics from a team, and he was saying that actually he would challenge anyone that's been running around for 60 minutes to go off and reach their baseline of their HIA thing, because they're fatigued, they've had a lack of oxygen to their brain because they've been running around. So he actually thinks we're probably too safe at the moment for obvious reasons, and we're doing it for the right reasons, because we're saying, no, you failed your HIA, but actually that HIA might need to improve over time as well to make sure it's as accurate as possible.
Rhys, you've heard it, you've seen it now. I mean, I guess the claims are that it can reduce impacts in the head by 75%. Is it a piece of equipment which you would be happy to use on the pitch?
Yeah, as Brian said, like anything to keep you on the field is obviously going to be of interest to the players. On the HIA subject, I consider myself somewhat an expert, having had 3 in the last 12 months. And you're right in terms of the scientists saying the HIA may not be applicable, but now the HIA has moved to a point where in the pre-season, when you do your baseline, you do some physical exertion before doing the HIA, you do it again, or you do your HIA, you do it again, so they can compare you when you're fresh and when you're fatigued, and then take that into account. But yeah, it's definitely something that, it's got to be approved by World Rugby first. Let's not sit there and think, well, these guys have brought out a new scrum cap and it's going to be the be-all and end-all. That has to be approved by the right people over the course of time. But as Brian says, anything that potentially keeps players on the field, they're going to be interested in.
One thing that can supposedly help is tackle techniques. We've seen a reduction in the height of that. I mean, where do you sit on that? The concussions you've had, did that force you to change the way in which you tackled?
Yeah, it's interesting. So obviously they've tried to bring the tackle height down, but I found actually as a taller guy, tackling lower was actually a bit more dangerous for me, or I ended up sustaining a couple of head bumps due to that. So we moved away from that during the World Cup, and I ended up tackling a bit higher, and I came in for a bit of criticism against Karevi, but actually there's nothing wrong with the tackle height against Karevi. It goes right under the ball and slides down. So it's very, very difficult. It's all horses for courses. If you're a tall bloke, there's no point trying to chase a guy who's this far off the floor, because you're only going to put yourself in a bad position. But equally, there's no point being a smaller guy trying to tackle a big guy at the top. You've got to work out what works for you, what's safe for you, and then try and take it from there.
Very quickly, Rhys, this is the mouth guard that we heard about during that VT. Have you spoken to any of the Ospreys boys that have tried it? heard about it?
Yeah, so obviously they say it's absolutely no different to wearing a normal gum shield. Obviously they've got the chip and everything in there, but the weight of it is the same. It's the same sort of feel in the mouth and whatever. And players are players. It's just sort of, you put it in, great. It's like wearing your GPS vest at the end of training. You chuck it off to whoever's collecting the data, and you say, yeah, that session was whatever out of 10, and you carry on with the rest of your day. You go in the ice bath, you go have some food, and you go home. So that, I think, is less for the player and more for the coach in terms of being able to periodise their training and when they bring contact in and when they've had a particularly hard game. Like we've all been there, where you're playing an absolute brutal game on a Saturday, and you think to yourself, I hope Tuesday doesn't come around too quickly, because I want to,
Well, look,
I
they're
don't
great.
want to do contact.
I think they're great, and if they can improve the game and make it safer as well, I think it's fantastic.